Today's video is sponsored by NVIDIA GeForce Now, the service that lets you play thousands of games remotely via the cloud. The following gameplay was even recorded using GeForce Now. Stay tuned for later in the video to learn more. Hey everyone, welcome back. Alright, so Space Marine 2. This initially launched last September, and broadly speaking, I quite enjoyed my time with the game. Top of the list of what I liked was the gameplay. This was just phenomenal. The moment-to-moment action feels great while you are hacking and slashing, mowing through hordes of smaller enemies, getting into back and forth slugfest with the bigger ones, and then every so often coming across these oversized, very deadly bosses. The combat pacing was just S tier. It was so good. You'd be slashing away with melee attacks while picking off high-value targets at a range. Couple this with perfectly timed dodges, counters, and over-the-top finishers. Just the action was non-stop and it was never boring. I was in love with the gameplay. World building and setting were also top-notch from start to finish. The tone of this game was near perfect. Visuals, sounds, environments, the set pieces. It really delivered exactly the kind of feel that I want while exploring a game set in the 40K universe. In addition, I felt like they really nailed the whole Space Marine fantasy, with you playing as this lumbering bringer of death, stomping through levels, yeeting everything in your path into another dimension, on top of the fact that all around you, there's just so much bombastic, over-the-top, crazy stuff happening the whole time. Literally thousands of enemies streaming in from off-screen, artillery fire tearing through the skies, explosions everywhere you look, and this happening simultaneously while you were going through these crazy, intense combat encounters. In addition to the story campaign, they also had 2 different multiplayer modes available, with co-op missions where you play through these levels, moving from area to area, fighting back hordes while completing objectives with up to 2 of your friends. And this had some replayability, as you would want to keep running these, progressing one of the 6 available classes, unlocking new weapons, perks, and cosmetics, while pushing the challenge higher with several available difficulty tiers. And then there was also competitive multiplayer PvP, where 2 teams would compete in either zone capture, elimination, or King of the Hill modes on multiple available maps. This too came with its own progression system to engage with. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed Space Marine 2, but at the same time, there was also a lot that I wanted to see improved and changed. Top of that list just being the need for additional content. While I enjoyed playing the game, I wanted more than what was there at release. What with the campaign being relatively short, taking us under 6 hours in total, most of the replayability came from those co-op operation missions and the PvP. And to be honest, the game launching only with 6 operations, we had pretty much exhausted all of that content and maxed out our characters after just a couple of days of playing. And the PvP, while it was fun to mess around with for a little while, it really wasn't deep enough to add too much replayability for me personally. And for as enjoyable as the combat is, and it's great, there's one glaring issue, and that being a rather inconsistent parry system. On the smaller enemies, it seems like as soon as that blue counter icon would appear, you can just hit parry and you're automatically going to get a successful counter. However, on many of those medium and larger enemies, hitting parry right away when that icon appears doesn't actually work to counter. You actually have to wait until a much tighter timing window when the enemy is actually just about to physically strike you. And the problem really is that the same indicator has vastly different timing windows, and this inconsistency across enemy types using that exact same blue counter icon was just frankly confusing, especially when those enemies are all grouped up. You're often not sure which enemy that counter icon is popping up for, and as a result, you would find yourself missing and messing up parries on a fairly regular basis. Also, dear lord, the game is just in desperate need of an FOV slider and or just much further camera placement options, especially while playing on PC, sitting only a couple feet away from your monitor. It is just crazy how much of your screen the character takes up. It's like at least a fourth, sometimes a whole third of your visibility blocked by your character, which often could feel quite claustrophobic. So yes, there were some things that I wanted changed and improved. I wanted more combat, I wanted a better feeling parry system, and I wanted more camera options being like at the top of the list. Well, since release, the game has actually gotten quite a few patches, hotfixes, and updates. Recently, I jumped back in to check it all out for myself, and so today we're going to take a look at what's changed and what is new with Space Marine 2. So the first update actually came early on, late September, just a few weeks post the game launching. With this, they added the new hub sparring area. This is a new location on the battle barge. That's the place you walk around while prepping for matches and customizing your characters. Well, in that space, there is now this relatively small room off to the side near where you queue up for a new round. You walk down this ramp, and then once you step inside the sparring arena, you are fully flagged for PvP, and you can fight any of your squad mates just for fun, really. It does appear like this utilizes the health and damage numbers from competitive multiplayer, as just a single melee strike was enough to take down your opponent. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a place to goof around and challenge your friends for bragging rights. Not a lot to this, just a nice little addition. They also added private mode for operations, which was pretty big. This lets players run either solo or duo, with bots then filling up your empty slots rather than being forced into a team with another random player, as was previously the case. At release, you were just forced to team up. It would automatically matchmake you with people if you didn't have a full squad going into a round. And this is nice for anyone who just doesn't want to play with random people, doesn't want to deal with potential griefing or whatever. Private mode, it's a nice inclusion. I was also very pleased to see they finally added ultra-wide support for PC. So for those of us who are using ultra-wide monitors, this is at least somewhat of a fix for that claustrophobic feeling, as you do get an extra field of view playing on not a 16:9 monitor. You just get that extra peripheral vision, which is really, really nice, especially in this game for as claustrophobic as it can feel. There was also a bunch of other gameplay, quality of life, and balance fixes with this update. They made adjustments to several melee and ranged weapons. They made improvements to campaign difficulty and the effectiveness of bot teammates. They did some balance tuning for operations as well as PvP, and there was a bunch, a metric ton actually, of bug fixes in here as well. All right, so that initial patch did have some nice new additions, but it was a relatively small, like all things considered. The first big update actually came in October with patch 4.0. It was here they finally rolled out some new additional content. So there's the new operation called Termination. This was the 7th operation in the game. This takes place on the planet Kadaku. It has you moving through several corridors and open areas while battling the hordes of Tyrannid as you make your way towards this new gargantuan foe, the Hierophant Bio-Titan. This thing is humongous, and they made sure that we get a good look at it while going through this, as there are several spots on the mission that really highlight its size. There's one section of the operation where it's literally like stepping over you and your teammates. And I mean, man, this thing is like the size of a skyscraper. It is at the very least several stories tall. It's also really cool because in this mission, they introduce some brand new mechanics here. In particular, you've got to, in an area, you have to power up, activate, and then manually control the firing of these massive cannons, and that is how you take down this new mega boss. So what it actually does is it replaces your weapon, and you've got to find a spot with some good sight lines towards the enemy, and then aim the cannons at that Hierophant using these guiding lasers, and then you have to manually charge up and fire those cannons. It's really, really cool. Even cooler though is that the thing notices you doing this and starts fighting back, as after you first hit it with the initial cannon fire, it will then turn towards you and start unloading this massive barrage of artillery that you have to avoid. And mind you, of course, you're not doing all of this in peace, because all the while you are still dealing with the hordes of Tyranids swarming in from all directions. I mean, just like much of the rest of the game, everything about the moment-to-moment action here in this combat feels fantastic. This was quite a lot of fun, and I tried all of it playing through this new mission using the wonderful services from today's sponsor. Yes, that is right. I jumped in to check out all of this new content that was added to Space Marine 2 using NVIDIA GeForce Now. Now, if you're not familiar, this is a streaming service that lets you play hundreds of different games, including Space Marine 2, running on these high-end, top-of-the-line hardware, which you can play remotely via cloud streaming. The process of getting going is fairly simple. You log in using your NVIDIA account, you register for the service, and then you can browse their massive library, click on the games that you want, and a few seconds later, you are in and playing. So GeForce Now supports more than 2,000 games from Steam, Epic Store, Ubisoft Connect, Battle.net, and PC Games Pass, letting you play them at GeForce quality on any device. Performance members can stream at up to 1440p with ultra-wide support available, while Ultimate members can stream from GeForce RTX 4080 rigs via the cloud, playing at up to 4K 120 FPS, and both Performance and Ultimate let members play with RTX on in supported games, which include Cyberpunk 2077, Black Myth Wukong, Alan Wake 2, and many more. And as mentioned, I jumped back in to check out all all of these Space Marine 2 updates using GeForce Now myself. It was a smooth experience, had some great performance, barely distinguishable from playing locally. If you'd like to learn more, check out the link in the description below. All right, so now let's get back to the rest of the updates. Also in October with patch 4.0, they added the new lethal difficulty for operations. So this is an additional higher tier of difficulty. Some highlights of this include ammo crates having limited refills per player, so you can't just spam it infinitely. Majoris enemies can become enraged, and in that, it makes them more deadly while also being harder to kill. Armor restores from finishers only when you are close to your teammates, requiring some more focus on team synergy and staying as a squad. And as a reward for taking on this newly added difficulty, it comes with its own unique cosmetics as well. They also added photo mode in operations when you're playing solo to get some nice screen grabs, and another round of gameplay and balancing tweaks. Now we saw a middle tier patch with patch 4.5 in November. This added some new stuff. Primarily got a new secondary weapon, the Neo Volkite pistol. This is a new thermal ray weapon available for the Assault, Vanguard, and Bulwark classes. Now, unlike other weapons in the game, this pistol actually blasts a heat ray at your enemies, dealing accumulative damage. So when you focus on a single enemy, the damage ramps up over time until eventually it culminates, generating this massive explosion for a huge burst of damage. Now, while we were playing, Liam actually gave this weapon a shot. He played around with it for a couple of matches. It seems like it wasn't that great for the smaller enemies since the damage starts off low, but for the big tanky ones, after a few seconds, you all of a sudden are chunking away at their health, which is really, really nice. So again, it's kind of like a situational weapon. It's not a universally good weapon, but for the big chunky enemies, it's a nice thing to have on your squad. The update also brought a bunch of buffs to several underperforming weapons in the game. Those include the Plasma Incinerator, where they slightly reduced the amount of heat generated by normal and charge shots. The Bolt Sniper Rifle had its fire rate increased, as well as additional headshot bonus damage. The Oculus Bolt Carbine had a scope added, as well as an increase to headshot damage. The regular Bolt Carbine, the SMG, saw adjustments to the damage fall-off curve, making it more effective, and the Auto Bolt Rifle had its max ammo increased by 1 magazine for each version. Then beyond that, another round of more bug fixes and tech improvements. Now moving into December, we got patch 5.0. This also came with a bunch of brand new additional content. First up was the new Operation Obelisk, the 8th operation now in the game. In this, you're facing off against the Legions of Chaos sent to Demirium. Your mission is to rotate a replica of the obelisk to disrupt the flow of energy, protecting the Aurora device. This operation takes place in parallel to the final events of the campaign, so you are playing along with what took place there as the other squad going up against this big enemy. Now, to reach the console control of the obelisk, at one point you have to make your way through this tomb plunged in darkness, and like the last new operation, this too introduced some brand new gameplay mechanics, which were pretty neat. The darkness of this tomb actually damages you and your allies when you're in it, and to combat that, you've got this chalice of light that you physically have to pick up and carry with you as you're moving through the tomb. But while you're carrying the chalice, you don't have your primary weapon, you can only use your offhand weapon, and your melee attacks get replaced with a basic kick. So what happens is you go through, and then there are altar locations scattered throughout the tomb where you can place down the obelisk, then resume fighting normally within the parameter before you pick it back up and start walking through again. And this was made up of several winding corridors with side paths and stuff. Just really neat, a fun new gameplay segment. And also here, they added a brand new enemy type, the Tzangor Enlightened. These are new Majoris enemies that can now spawn in any operation that features the Thousand Suns. Now, the note from the game director described these enemies saying that they are this disc-flying melee and ranged hybrid unit. They're fearsome opponents, especially when met in greater numbers. However, catching them after a parry or during a long animation can make them easy targets. Basically, they hover above the battlefield. They will swoop in and damage you occasionally with melee attacks while firing at you from range, darting around quickly as you attempt to shoot them, but as the game director mentioned, if you catch them off guard, you can quickly dispatch them. Oh yeah, and the new mission had another segment with it that had a new gameplay related mechanic. There was an area with these floating islands that you had to go to these devices and rotate the islands until they eventually lined up properly, creating a bridge for you to cross this massive chasm. It's just really nice to see that they're not just adding new corridors with enemies like placed in a new arrangement, but they're adding new enemies and new mechanics with each of these operations. Really, really nice to see them go that extra step, really. really. In addition to the new operation and enemy type, patch 5.0 also brought with it some new cosmetic customization options for the Dark Angels. There were more gameplay and balance tweaks for melee, blocking, and range, and a bunch of additional quality of life and AI improvements. They are just continuously, patch after patch, working on tweaking and fine-tuning the game's balancing, which is really nice to see. All right, so after having jumped back in myself, I gotta say, I like all the new stuff they've added. The highlights here being those 2 new operations. Both of them I found quite fun. I like the variety that they've added. I also like the fact that they introduced new mechanics. They push up the difficulty, letting you try harder challenge tiers, which actually comes with like forcing you to play in a new style, forcing you to stay around your teammates. And yeah, the new mechanics were neat, like aiming the massive cannons at that huge Tyranid boss, or walking the Chalice of Light through that dark dungeon, aligning those floating islands. These are all really nice to see. And again, it's nice that they're not just, I just think it's nice that they're going the extra mile to add additional new interesting things rather than just like new corridors and rooms with the same old enemies. Them adding new mechanics, adding new systems and features to that experience is nice. I think the new enemy type is neat. It's like fighting a Warhammer version of Green Goblin. I appreciate the additional challenge they've added with these new harder difficulty settings, and the Battle Barge duel arena. I mean, it's cool, kind of like a one-off thing. I don't know that I'm gonna step back in there again, except for laughs with my friends, but it's a nice addition for people who want to mess around with their mates. Now, there's still quite a lot though that I'd like to see added and improved. Like, I appreciate the ultra wide support, but I still think we need wider FOV options and the ability to pull the camera back a little bit. Jumping back into this game, the immediate first thing that I noticed was how darn close the camera is to your character and how much of the screen the character takes up. So would like to see them do that. The number one thing that I want them to add is that horde mode. We do know a horde mode is coming. It's not planned to release until later in the year. And I gotta say, like, if they do this right, if it's like Gears of War level of depth to it in this horde mode, could be a massive addition and add a ton of replayability to the game. Also, I gotta say, I still think the parry window feels wonky for us. It's just the inconsistency of the same icon for multiple different types, for multiple different parry timings. It just doesn't feel good. I wish they could really fine tune this. And I do realize that there are different weapon types which have different parry windows. I totally get that that is a thing. It consistently feels inconsistent, and I wish that wasn't the case. I feel like they should have different icons for the different parry timings, right? But who knows? Now, what's next for the game? Well, just a couple of weeks ago, they touched on their immediate plans for the new content coming in 2025. This will include some fresh content for PvP. They're going to be adding a new PvP map. They said this is set in a closed environment with a lot of narrow passages that push you to engage in more close quarters combat. And there's going to be custom PvP lobbies, and this is really cool. This is coming with patch 7.0. Here, we're going to be able to play with modifiers to change things like the amount of players up to 6 versus 6. We can change the timer limit for matches, the maximum limit score, and we can change it so that we'll have more than 2 players for each individual class. So no more getting locked out of your favorite class. New PvE content is going to include prestige ranking that's going to be introduced during season 3, allowing you to upgrade classes even further. There are going to, of course, be new operations and enemies being added to the game. We've already got 2, bringing the total to 8. Looks like they're going to keep on adding new operations and enemies, and another new higher tier difficulty with exclusive rewards being added as well. And they did finally tease by saying that the hotly anticipated horde mode is going to arrive later in 2025, and we'll get additional updates as we get closer to it. And as I said, that is like the primary number one thing. Man, if they get horde mode right, if they really add some depth to it and take this game and add like so much replayability to it, which would be really great, because I love playing Space Marine 2. It just feels like you run through the content fairly quickly, which is fine. And not every game needs to be a forever game that lasts forever, that you play day in and day out, right? But I like playing Space Marine 2 so much, but I feel like I exhausted the content somewhere around like the 50 to 60 hour mark. I was like, yeah, I've pretty much done and seen everything, and there wasn't much incentive to keep playing, but horde mode could certainly bring that incentive. And these additions, like the new operations, are nice, but it probably adds like a couple of days worth of additional content if you're coming back to check out what's already been added to the game. So yeah, there you go. But yeah, the base game, I really, really enjoyed. They have already added a few new interesting things, and I like what I've seen so far. I'm looking forward to seeing more, looking forward to checking out the additional stuff that's planned for later this year. And the horde mode, have I mentioned how much I want that? I really want the Horde mode. All right, that does it for us today. Thanks once again to NVIDIA GeForce Now for sponsoring this video. As mentioned, this service lets you play thousands of games running on their high-end hardware, played remotely on any device via the cloud. It is a great option, especially if you yourself have a mid or lower end PC. You can play these games at the highest settings, running at high frame rates with everything maxed out, even on like lower end devices. So it's really, really nice. To learn more, check out that link below. But that is all for today. That does it for this video. Thanks for checking out our updated look at Space Marine 2. I'll see you all in the next one. Take it easy.